Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vecenie. We're presented by CLNS Media. Today on the show, we've got good friend of the program, Cole Zwicker. We are embarking on a bit of a bigger project here. We are going to break down the situation regarding younger players for each team in the NBA, and we're going to do it by division. We're going to start with the Central Division in large part because of the first bit of news that we're going to talk about at the top, the big Kevin Love extension. So Cole, before we get into that, how are you doing?
It's going well, man. A little bit of a downtime this year. I don't know what to do with myself. I ended up watching like Bear Grylls versus Shark the other night where he poured fish guts on himself and jumped into shark-infested waters with like 4 different kinds of sharks. So that's kind of where I'm at in the offseason. I don't really know what the hell to do with myself. I'm not nearly as busy as you are.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just keep busy because I keep adding things to my plate. Like, oh yeah, I'll write about NBA team movement. Oh yeah, I'll write about college basketball and high school basketball at some point here soon. It's just I do it to myself, really, is what happens. But I did find some time over the week to watch Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. It is just wonderful. Like, I think that once Laura gets back from Chicago on Wednesday, that I am just going to watch it again with her. It is that good.
Well, there you go. Never even heard of it, so I guess I'm out of the loop.
It's an Amazon show set in the 1950s with a woman trying to become a comedian. And then I watched Glow like 2 weeks ago with Laura. That was really good. What else am I caught up on? I don't know. I'm caught up on a bunch of TV finally. So I find time in the off season. It's just like it also continues to pile up as well.
Yeah, when you start taking on self-created tasks, I understand that. I'm almost done working through all the cap sheets that I'm doing. So after that, I'm really going to be starving for content. Probably going to start diving into 2019 class more heavily. 2019 class is going to be a fun evaluation, I guess. It's a polite way of putting it.
not a great class from what I've seen so far. And I've seen all of the kids in the class live at this stage. I think maybe a couple I haven't seen live. Like even Luka Samanic, Sekou Doumbouya, like I've seen those guys. Like it's class. It's definitely class. Let's get into the Kevin Love extension though. Kevin Love had 1 year and $24.1 million left on his contract, in addition to a player option that I believe was $25.6 million. But instead of having to go down that route of having him on an expiring contract, instead of going down the route of having him on a potential player option deal, the Cavs just decided to extend him. It gave him 4 extra years on top of that 1 year he has set for this year at $120 million, putting his full number left in terms of what he has on his salary at 5 years, $145 million. Thoughts?
I don't hate it as much as a lot of other guys do. I understand it from several retrospects. I mean, like, he's getting less than his, I guess, theoretical max next offseason. I'm not saying he's going to get paid his 10-year veteran max of 35% of the $109 million cap, which would come out to 4 extra years, $170.9 million. So that's about $50.5 million more than he signed for here, if we're just talking extra years of the deal. It's tough for me because, again, it comes down to where the Cavs think they are as a team. If they're trying to compete this year, you've heard some talk about Dan Gilbert kind of wanting to one-up LeBron and be like, we're going to make the playoffs even without you. Or it could be as a trade chip, honestly. That's kind of interesting. The most fascinating part to me is that second dynamic of the trade chip and what you're trying to do to create an asset. If Kevin Love opts out next year, let's say he never signs this extension and he's an expiring contract at the deadline. Are you getting a first-round pick for him? I don't know. I don't think so, not in this climate. So I think the Cavs are kind of betting on maybe we're going to win a little bit short-term and we're going to create a long-term asset where when the cap spikes up a little bit next offseason, when more teams have cap space, maybe there is an asset to be gained from this process. But this is always the difficult calculus, is trying to weigh those two things on how to create a contract that has, an asset long-term that you can return actual valuable pieces with.
So yeah, the big thing for me here, first and foremost, is that everyone is just kind of assuming that Kevin is going to get back to the Minnesota level, it seems like, right? Like, it feels like that is like a thought that's been out there, right?
Yeah, I think at least in terms of usage, like how he's going to be utilized without LeBron. But the health, of course, that's the issue.
Yeah, so like the health is the issue, but even going back like long term, you look at guys who have averaged 25 points and 10 rebounds in a game on league average efficiency, which is basically what Kevin Love's 2014 was. He actually was a little bit higher than league average efficiency at a 59 true shooting percentage. You look back through those guys who have accomplished that, there's not really anyone on like Kevin Love level who's done that. Like there have been 6 players who have accomplished 25 and 10 when they've been 30 years of age or older, which is how old Kevin will be next month. Shaquille O'Neal, Wilt Chamberlain, David Robinson, Akeem Olajuwon, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Karl Malone.
Oh boy.
That's a good list of players. That no one near Kevin Love's quality, but then you even go to 20 points and 10 rebounds on league average efficiency at 30 years of age or older. And you only add to that group Charles Barkley, Elgin Baylor, Patrick Ewing, Kevin Garnett, Elvin Hayes, Moses Malone, and Bob Pettit. So like all top 50 players ever. And I am skeptical that it's going to be as easy as everyone is assuming for Kevin Love to just dive right back into being this dominant big man that is incredible at basketball. It's asking a lot of him, I think.
Yeah, I don't know about dominant at all. I'm definitely not in that camp where he's going to be like this super, super high level impact guy, like a top 20 player or so. But I still think he'll be good. I think he's going to age better, assuming health cooperates, than a lot of guys do as far as just his general skill set, which is reliant on shooting. As far as off movement, he can do that as well as any big in the league right now. I don't think that's going to go away. He's still crafty enough. He's skilled enough in the post to take advantage of mismatches. He has a little bit of a power game there. And it's not like his defense is predicated solely on his movement skills. Like he's never been like adept there. I mean, he moves his feet pretty well,
but really bad defender. Like, what do you?
Yeah, exactly.
mean?
So like the downside is like marginal there. You know what I mean? Like he might get a little bit worse if he loses a step, which I expect he probably will. But his biggest issues to me are still just his lack of length and his jumping ability in several respects. So he's already a deficient defender in several respects. I don't see that really dropping off, even if he loses a half step or a full step. So yeah, I think he's going to age okay. He's going to be a productive player. The question is it going to be worth this contractual value to Cleveland long term? Let's say they keep him. Like, what is that? That's my biggest issue with this trade or this extension is what is he providing Cleveland if he doesn't get traded?
Yeah, so I think that's a big question for me as well. To me, I agree with you. I think that the trade aspect of this is by far the most interesting. But again, like I want to point out, like history is against him performing at even like a 20 and 10 level on league average efficiency next year. If he is a 19 and 10 guy who is a bad defender, how is that worth this contract?
Yeah, I mean, there's some risk here. And his skill set, if it doesn't age well, if he's not the same productive player, which I don't expect him to be. I don't expect him to be as efficient as he was playing with LeBron. I don't expect him to morph back into necessarily Minnesota Kevin Love when he was at his peak in terms of, better athleticism and all of that. So I don't know. It depends on what you think the value of the contract is. For me, I have to put it in context and say, maybe if you're a competing team and you're paying Kevin Love maybe, I don't know, like $5 or $6 million above market rate, or say maybe even $8 to $10 million above market rate, but that's actually providing you with trips to the finals like he was with LeBron. Yeah. That makes it tenable, right? Yep. But if you are a fringe playoff team, what is that really doing in the long term?
Yeah, no, and that's where I come down on it. I don't really think it's doing much for Cleveland in the long term, having him on their roster, except that they won't bottom out. The thing that's interesting is the trade aspect to me. There are 11 teams right now that project to have enough cap space to just take in Kevin Love's contract next summer via trade. So, like, without even throwing in any salary on top of it, if you put in salary, even a team like Orlando might have enough money to do it, like if they threw in the right money. So I'm looking at this from a Kevin Love perspective, thinking that he probably will not be on the Cavaliers in the next 2 years, realistically, just given the fact that in 2020, teams are also going to have a lot of cap space then. The big thing for me is, what does he return in a trade? I really think that the last 2 years of this deal, his age 33 and 34 seasons, are a pretty significant weight on this contract that is going to diminish the return that he gets. That's why, like, whenever people keep saying, well, what else were they going to do? Why wouldn't you just extend him and then deal with the problems later on? I mean, I would have tried to extend him for 2 years, first and foremost. And tried to have said like, hey, we'll give you your max, which I think would have been, would have gotten him up to 3 years and like 85 million or something like that, and said, hey, you can hit the free agency market at 32. We don't know what you're going to get, but we don't know what you're going to get next summer if you don't necessarily play all that well, and just kind of hold it against him that way. And then you can move him pretty easily, I think, on a 3-year contract versus on a 1-year contract. It actually still makes him an asset in that way. But the last 2 years of this contract extension that are 2 years, 60 million whenever he's 33 and 34 years old, that's going to be a problem, I think.
Yeah, and we don't know for sure if they didn't try to do that, if the Cavs didn't try to get him on a lower extension. You know what I mean?
I'm sure they did, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, for his perspective, maybe he just wanted, I'm sure he just wanted to lock in as many years at a high rate as possible. Right. So maybe that just made the deal fall apart or whatnot as far as the shorter extension talk goes. What's most fascinating to me is I think the best avenue, the best recourse would have been for the Cavs if they're going to trade him at the deadline this year if Kevin Love opted into the final year of his deal. Not this season, but the next season. So it's more like a season and a half deal. So you're not just getting an expiring, but you're getting 1 extra year. But who knows if he would have done that, right? I mean, you're running the risk of maybe he just leaves in free agency, you don't get anything for him. That might be fine for Cleveland. I think that's a viable recourse. I have no problem if Kevin Love leaves, especially if, in years 2 or 3, if they don't move this deal right away and they wait 2 to 3 years, maybe they have to attach a piece to do so with those latter 2 years. But I don't know how much legs I can really give to that circumstance at the trade deadline if he really would opt into a second year of his contract. That's just playing a little bit with fire because, again, you don't know. You can't predict the future like that. I would bet against him doing it. I think he probably would have opted out, assuming health cooperated. So that's the hard part about this, is trying to create a contract that has value to move. And I do think the cap space is going to help. And I do think you can talk yourself, like Kevin Love's not untradeable. I think that narrative, people always throw that out there whenever somebody decides, like Timothy Mozgov has gotten moved 3 times. And that dude might not be an NBA player anymore. Like, I think that they can move Kevin Love. It's just all about the cost and the price of doing so. I would try to do so quickly. I would try to do so next offseason, especially to a team that maybe strikes out that wants to make the playoffs. Then you move him quickly. Maybe you get a first-round pick and a young prospect. I think that's absolutely on the table here.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably what it is. And to be clear, I mean, I bring up the idea of trying to, get him on a 2-year extension. I just would not have gone for a 4-year extension. I would have traded him this summer as opposed to giving him a 4-year extension. I would have said, hey, we'll take you on a 2-year extension. I might have been willing to go to 3 if you even say like, hey, you're going to go on a declining basis. We'll give you the 120% max that an extension can be in year 1, and then go decline at the max levels each of the next 2 years. So you get something like, I guess it would be 3 years, 90 million on top of this. I still don't love that deal, but I think it's less onerous for a potential acquiring team. And to me, I think it would be very difficult for Kevin Love to turn that deal down. So like maybe he would have, and we just know that he would have done that, but it's how I would have done things, and I would have tried to trade him this summer if that couldn't have gotten done. And you look at a team like, I think Miami makes sense for him, right? Like you could maybe try and get a guy like a Justice Winslow who has 1 year left before he has to get paid. You get a young player like him who I think is valuable, and maybe take like the salary ballast that is maybe like James Johnson for him, like James Johnson and Justice Winslow, and then maybe like a couple seconds. Absolutely.
I think that would be the kind of deal I would look at. I agree with what you're saying. I don't think this was the most optimal avenue that Cleveland chose. And just for, I guess, logistics, they have to wait 6 months to trade Love, which, happens before the trade deadline. So he's eligible to be dealt this season. They just have to wait until the extended trade rules are satisfied as far as waiting a certain amount of time. So I agree with you. I think that this is, again, not the most optimal setting for Cleveland, but I also don't think this is like the worst thing that's ever happened to them. I think they're going to be able to maneuver around. And it only takes one asshole. That's the saying. That's how it goes in the offseason. One team likes Kevin Love. They think that maybe he puts them, from a fringe playoff team to a playoff team. There's your deal, and that makes it worthwhile.
Yeah, if you made me guess, I would say that he is not going to be on the Cavs within the next 2 years. Just because I do think someone will take that contract like pretty easily.
If Kevin Love was a free agent next summer, what do you think he gets on the open market? I think I agree with you. I don't think he gets 4 years, but I could see him getting like a 3-year max, even like a higher level than this. Because, again, this is not his true max.
Yeah, I think that he would probably get something like 3 years, 100 million, something like that. that's fine. But, in a trade scenario here, when you're taking on 3 years, or you're taking on 4 years, 120 million, so 30 million instead of like 33, 34 million, you're also giving up assets at this stage as well. Yeah. So, you have to calculate that into the monetary value. So teams would be giving up more trading for him than they would be just signing him via free agency. And I think that reduces the value for them.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's spot on. I was just getting more like the number isn't astronomically high. I could see it kind of being like a Kyle Lauri kind of situation, even though I don't think he's as good as Kyle Lauri was when Lauri signed his new deal with the Raptors, but that 3-year deal, not quite at his full max, but maybe a little bit above what we expect.
Yeah, like Paul Millsap, I think got $300, right?
Yep.
So like that's the kind of money I think, because Paul's game, I think probably realistically ages better than Kevin Love's game, right? Just because he's a much better defender, just kind of a little bit more physically rugged and physically, beastly. And sometimes that doesn't age as well, but just the versatility of his game, I kind of trust a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And Millsap, he had a team option, correct, in his deal. Yeah, his final year is a team option, so maybe Kevin Love gets that scenario too. So I do think your point overall about the length of the contract is probably where my qualms would exist the most.
Yeah. Let's move on, though. Let's get into the meat of this podcast. We are going to break down the young players on every NBA team over the course of the next few weeks. How we have kind of cut off these barriers, right, is really, it was just like a kind of decision on my behalf. It's players either who have a 1995 birthday or later, as well as guys who are still on like rookie scale contracts, right? So like someone like Malcolm Brogdon, for instance, isn't on a rookie scale contract, but like I still threw him in just because, even though he's 26, I think, and he's now going to be entering his third year, he's actually kind of a critical piece for them long term. But I used the 1995 birthday thing because I kind of just didn't want to talk about Giannis. I think that Giannis is far above and beyond what the scope of this project is, right? Like he's already just so established as a dominant player in the NBA that I don't know if it's all that valuable to discuss in this context.
Yeah, Giannis is already kind of an entrenched top 10 guy. We're trying to get more, I guess, at the meat of the podcast being prospects and kind of, assessing their game so far and how they project forward. You're hoping that some of these guys get to the level that Giannis is, but he's already entrenched.
Yeah, and just for the sake of, transparency here, I'm going to kind of list out guys in the vague order that I would kind of place them as assets. Some of this might not stand up to long-term scrutiny because I just kind of ordered them off the top of my head while looking through rosters. But if a guy is second and third, don't get like way out of whack here by saying, "Oh my God, you have Luke Kennard over Stanley Johnson" or something like that. Like I just kind of threw guys down in like a vague order more than anything, but I am going to try and do it like in something of an order like that. What else do you have to say about the project?
Yeah, for me, I kind of tiered the guys. So. Yeah. Kind of getting to what you were getting at as far as like having Kris Dunn slightly ahead of Zach LaVine. It's not inconceivable that Zach LaVine becomes a better, I guess, asset of the better building block long term. It's just I'm grouping them similarly. So I kind of had 5 different tiers, and I'll kind of explain that. I didn't define them because it gets kind of sticky. If you're talking about tier 1, is that a top 10 player potentially? I still think we're at the stage with so many of these guys where we just don't know. We don't have enough information yet. So I just try to clump guys together in similar groups. Hopefully it'll make sense as we walk through via the podcast here.
Yeah, so let's start with Chicago because you brought up Zach LaVine and Kris Dunn. So players who qualified for this with the Bulls. We've got Lauri Markkanen, Wendell Carter, Jabari Parker, Zach LaVine, Kris Dunn, the God Bobby Portis, Chandler Hutchison, Denzel Valentine, and Antonio Blakeney. Is there anyone else that you want to talk about on the Bulls? Like, I think that we could theoretically throw Ryan Arcidiacono into this, but sure.
I don't know. Did Cameron Payne end up not meeting some kind of criteria for you? I can't recall off podcast.
The usefulness criteria, maybe?
He was in my tier 5 fringe category, I guess you could say, but I guess he bears just mentioning very briefly.
Yeah, so like I knew he was a 1994 birthday, and just didn't include him, but I guess that he is still theoretically on a rookie contract because for some ungodly reason, Chicago picked up that option.
Hey, it's your podcast, dude. Whatever you want to do.
I mean, we can talk about him briefly if you want, but let's start with Lauri Markkanen. Markkanen is coming off of an unbelievable rookie season. Much, much better than what I think most people anticipated. I was a big Markkanen guy kind of coming into the draft. I think I had him right around 7th or 8th on my board. Had him as a much better defender than what I think most people did. But even I didn't expect necessarily him to be the best 3-point shooter as a 20-year-old and under player in NBA history, I think. So what were your thoughts on Markkanen's rookie season?
I think he rebounded the ball a little bit better than I expected him to do. He was not adept there at Arizona, but a lot of that was probably lineup based and where he is positioned on the court. But just showing that ability, playing next to Robin Lopez, who, again, we've talked about this numerous times on the podcast. Lopez is great at boxing out, and I think Lauri Markkanen benefited from that. He moved better on the perimeter defensively than I thought he would. I'm still not buying him really as a high-level defender. I think maybe he's, average-ish. At his peak, I think he's probably a little bit below average last season overall when you talk about rim protection, help defense, but he's better than his reps adjusted. A lot of people pointed to his college stats, which were horrendous as far as steals and blocks, and said this guy's a bad defensive player. I don't think he's a bad defensive player as far as being unsalvageable. So if you were downplaying his shooting ability pre-draft, I don't know what you're thinking, because this guy is one of the best big man shooters to ever enter the draft. I mean, that was never the issue with him. He can shoot off motion, he can shoot pull-ups, he can create his own shot. He's not Dirk, but I mean, he's kind of a very, very poor man's version of Dirk in that respect. So I like him. I think I'm not as sold on him being this franchise caliber player yet, but I do think he is definitely in the upper end of all the prospects we're going to talk about in this division, especially.
So, yeah, I mean, let's kind of start with the defense first, because I don't think that there's a crazy amount to talk about there, but it's kind of worth noting. He was always a little bit quicker than what he got credit for at Arizona, I thought. And then additionally, the fact that Arizona's scheme, just generally because they play so conservatively within that pack line scheme, it just artificially reduces steals and blocks. So you really do have to look beyond the fact that he was a low-end steals and blocks guy on a percentage basis. He moves his feet really well for a guy who is 7 feet tall, doesn't necessarily move his feet well for someone who is a power forward, but as a center, I think he is definitely someone who can move his feet. And then additionally, he's not necessarily a great rim protector, just not even on the basis of not being a good shot blocker. He's just not strong enough right now to really hold his position in there and take up space and really contest shots inside. So that, I think, is the next step for him. He needs to figure out how to be a great rim protector despite not being a great shot blocker.
Yeah, and I have my reservations about that. He doesn't have the impactful length and the strength. You can kind of explode over the top of him. He's not the most physical guy, even though I do think he was a little bit more physical than I gave him credit for last year. So as a high-level team defender, if he knows where to be and he can move his feet relatively well, I think he'll be salvageable. I don't see impactful defender within his range of outcomes necessarily, but I do think he's a little underrated in that capacity.
Would agree. And then offensively, unbelievable shooter. We know that. Coming into the draft, I called him the best 7-foot shooting prospect in NBA history because I don't think it would have been fair to know that Dirk was going to be as good as he was whenever he was overseas. We had a great sample of Lauri Markkanen shooting off of movement and shooting off of every single thing imaginable when he was at Arizona. Just such a high volume, high efficiency shooter that we knew that was going to translate. I will bring up that his 2-point percentage was not particularly great, coming in at, I think, 49.7%. A lot of that came from him taking just an inordinate amount of mid-range jumpers that he probably should not be taking. He was taking something like 3 to 4 mid-range jumpers a game, just in the area from 6 feet out until the 3-point line. And those aren't shots that he's going to be successful with, really, unless he really breaks just every single barrier imaginable. 35% from those areas last year, but was it 68% at the basket last year? I think that statement bodes well for an offense that I think should be a little bit more movement based, should be a little bit more spacing based this year.
Sure, and that definitely makes sense. And he definitely was in a lot of situations last year where he was shooting over the top on switches, and that's a shot he needs. He needs to be able to beat switches in the post. That's something that a lot of these kind of, I guess, more finesse stretch four types can't do. Like Dragan Bender can't really do that, and that is a huge inhibitor on his game. You know what I mean? Like if he can't beat a switch and you're a pick and pop big, for example, that hurts. But
a lot of inhibitors on Dragan Bender's game.
Yeah, for sure. But Markkanen, the ability to shoot off motion is really what makes him special, in my opinion. The ability to run off screens, Hoiberg utilizes him really well, running off screens from like a Robin Lopez type, who's an excellent screener, gets separation. I think you're going to see a lot more big-to-big screening actions with him and Wendell Carter. Both those guys are really versatile. They can both shoot the ball. So I still think that's that's obviously Markkanen's primary source of input is just his gravity as a spacing threat. And, we'll see how much the passing improves. I don't think he's a great passer by any means. He's a capable ball handler, especially when he plays the five. I think he can attack guys off closeouts. He's a little bit more athletic. He's got more pop there as far as getting to the rim and finishing explosively, especially at the five. So he's got a well-rounded game for shooting and attacking closeouts and beating mismatches in the post. I don't think he's going to be, again, this is what made Dirk so special, is he was like an all-time elite mid-range shooter, and it's just very hard to reach that kind of level. It's kind of like the CJ McCollum, Chris Paul dynamic for guards. I don't see Markkanen ever being that, but if he can be dynamic in the modern game as far as shooting threes, attacking closeouts, making the right read on like a short roll, he's going to be a really, really awesome offensive player.
Totally agree there. The thing that he didn't really show, I agree with you, is the ability to kind of beat mismatches in the post. That is something that he was really good at the international level when he played for Finland in some of those tournaments. So I would hope that that's something that comes along, but maybe it won't. He was playing at a low level. He was not even playing in the A division in some of those events. So we'll see if that comes along. Let's talk about Wendell Carter. How do we like the fit between Wendell Carter and Lauri Markkanen together?
I was going to ask you really quick. This ties into Wendell perfectly with Lauri, but optimally, are you using Lauri at the 4 or the 5? I mean, not on this team specifically, because I think we know the answer to that now as far as how they're going to build. Yeah. But if it was up to you, where would you have him?
I would have him at the 5 because I think that basically every 7-footer that is not Kevin Durant is a 5.
Okay.
I care as much now about the ability to contain and diminish penetration as I do about rim protection. I think that having a great rim protector is obviously incredibly valuable, but also having someone who can really move his feet on the perimeter and contain that penetration is also valuable. So I would play Markkanen at the 5. I would allow his foot speed to kind of do work a little bit and marginally create fewer chances than other point guards are going to get against other centers, and hope that I could pair him with a good weak side rim protector at the 4 as opposed to the 5. But Wendell Carter is interesting in that regard because he kind of does a little bit of both of that.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think this is actually a really great fit long term. They're both really skilled. They can play 5 out while retaining their size and skill level. Again, you don't see that very often. If Wendell's summer league performance as far as moving in space is indicative of being above average and actually pretty competent there, I think this is going to be awesome. I mean, maybe defensively you're going to suffer a little bit because you're sacrificing some foot speed, especially against smaller lineups, but offensively both guys can beat mismatches okay. I trust Wendell more there. He's a little bit more physical inside, but again, not many teams can play 2 7-footers or 2 6'10", 6'11" guys who can shoot the ball and actually make plays. I think Wendell is really going to complement Lauri because he doesn't need the ball all the time. He can kind of play make, dribble handoffs. You can have Lauri run off screens. Wendell can hit him on handoffs. And then defensively, Wendell's a really high-level team defender. So some of that dynamic you were talking about with Lauri, maybe defending point of attack on screening actions, and Carter being just hyper-aware off the ball, rotating over to protect the rim. I think that's the overall encompassing idea here.
Yeah, I don't think Wendell Carter is a switch defender by any stretch. I think he is a guy that you're going to want to sink back and allow him to backpedal and then either recover or protect the rim, just as a guy who has long arms and who takes up space inside and has good instincts there. It's going to make it interesting, though, because I don't know how I feel about Lauri Markkanen getting put into positions where he has to guard kind of contain dribble penetration from point guards and then recover out onto 3-point shooters, getting put back out into space again. I don't know that his foot speed is that quick for those kind of actions. Like, I think it's a little bit easier for him to switch out onto a guard or hedge out onto a guard quickly, stay with him for a couple slides and then recover back, as opposed to having to kind of deal with complicated actions out on the perimeter consistently.
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair. And all that help and recover stuff is so damn hard for bigs in the modern game. Like, closing out is probably the single hardest skill set to really get good at. I don't think anybody's really that great at it, honestly. Like, even Draymond Green gets beat pretty repeatedly on closeouts. It's a tough game. That's why you see so much switching, is they want to mitigate all these actions where you have to really cover a large amount of ground to close out on these 3-point shooters. So I think they're both going to have issues there overall. I mean, any big is going to in the modern game, but both these guys can switch a little bit. I do think that Wendell's length is going to allow him to do more than he gets credit for as far as switching, and Lauri's got a little bit better feet than he gets credit for. So I think they're a little bit more versatile defensively overall. It's just this kind of builds into the rest of the roster. We can start getting down. I mean, you probably want to talk a little bit more about Wendell, but overall, I think that the issue with me is how good can your team really be if your two most promising prospects, in my opinion, are both bigs? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Like, I am worried about the overall foot speed of a roster that is going to include, at least for next year, those two, Jabari Parker and Zach LaVine, coming off of an injury. Right? Like, that seems like a difficult judge for an NBA team trying to build out its defense. Like, I don't know how they all kind of play together in that way. Well,
yeah, and I think that you're not being done any favors when your perimeter defense, your wings are Zach LaVine and Jabari Parker. No matter who you are at the 4 and the 5, even if you're Gobert, that's going to be a trying task. So Wendell, I mean, they still have Robin Lopez is probably going to start, of course, but long term, if that's really going to be the foursome, that's going to put a lot of strain on Wendell, especially to kind of cover from these guys from the help side position.
But more than anything, what I think it does too is that it limits what they can do in terms of their roster building, because I do think that they now need strong defensive wings. Like, it's not just like, oh yeah, like you can have a Zach LaVine there as long as you have a really good 3. Like, I think they need 2 strong defensive wings now.
I think there's definitely an argument to that, especially if Kris Dunn isn't the point guard, because I think you might be able to get away with one lackluster, because Kris Dunn is so good as far as a lead ball handler, guard, and defending point of attack and all of that. But if he's not like that dynamic creator, then a lot of the offensive stuff that you can optimize with Wendell and Lauri goes out the window. So that's kind of the interesting juggling act here, is because Kris Dunn, they need him defensively, but is he enough of a primary creator really to get all these guys the ball, get them involved, and really optimize the fact that the Bulls have arguably maybe the best 4 or 5 young, skilled pairing for bigs in the league?
Yeah, and I mean, like, do you want to talk about Jabari Parker and Zach LaVine? We talked about them pretty substantially on the pod last week, right? Like, do we want to keep diving into that?
No, I'm good, honestly. I'll just say overarching fashion for my tiers. I had Wendell and Lauri Markkanen in a tier above the rest of these guys. So I had Kris Dunn, Zach LaVine, Jabari Parker. I even included Bobby Portis and Chandler Hutchison in the same tier. I could go either way with those. They could be a tier down, but just overall, that's kind of how I grouped them. I think Wendell and Lauri are the 2 guys here.
Well, let's talk about Kris Dunn, though, too, because Kris Dunn, I think, I don't know if he's not the most important player on this roster, but he's going to be the guy who has the keys to the offense and who has, I mean, the most important role defensively, just because he's one of, I think, the 5 best defensive guards in the league. I mean, he is just absolutely unbelievable. Like, I think he is genuinely a better defensive guard than DeJounte Murray, who got named to the all-defensive team this year. Like, he is just a monster.
Yeah, especially on the ball. I mean, off the ball, he gambles a little bit. I think that's where DeJounte makes up maybe a little bit of ground there. But as far as just straight containing penetration, I'm not sure if there's a guard that I would pick over him. When you talk about size, athleticism, length, all of that, he's incredible there.
And he improved a little bit as a 3-point shooter this year, got up to 32%. I mean, a lot of that was off the catch, if I remember correctly. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head on that one, but it does feel like most of that stuff came off the catch. One number that is worth noting, he did reduce the turnovers from 20.8% in his rookie year in Minnesota down to 17.3%, while upping the assist rate to 33.3%. He's still not a guy who is like hyper efficient offensively as a scorer, but I did like the steps that he showed defensively or offensively as a distributor this year.
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair. I still think he gets sped up a little bit too much. I'm not sure if I trust his decision making as far as handling in tighter confines and pick and roll and kind of finishing around the basket. Like, he wasn't that great of a finisher this year. I think he was around the 26th percentile, below average finishing around the rim. So there's some things he can work on overall as far as being that primary kind of creator type. It's just, that's a tough threshold to clear, man. Like, primary creators have to be so damn good, especially when they're not off the dribble shooting threats. Like, Kris Dunn can make a pull-up, but you're living with that shot if you're the opposite team. Like, you're ducking under, you're making him shoot that and try to gain the requisite balance. So, again, if he can shoot off the dribble, that unleashes so much of their offense as far as pick and pop, pick and roll with Lauri and with Wendell. I think that could be potentially devastating, especially when you have a LaVine spacing the floor and Jabari if he makes catch and shoot threes. It's just, that's a lot of pressure and that's a lot of improvement that Dunn has to show at an older age offensively, as far as not only a decision maker but as a self creator for, you know, getting points efficiently.
Yeah, Kris Dunn took about 350 shots between 5 and 23 feet last year, so just like before the 3-point line. He only took about 300 shots at the rim and from beyond the 3-point line. That number needs to just change. Like, he needs to take better shots. He needs to take more true distribution of shots that can allow him to be efficient. And this team surrounding him with very, very skilled, very spacing conscious offensive players like Jabari Parker and Zach LaVine, like Wendell Carter and Lauri Markkanen, like a Bobby Portis, maybe even like a Denzel Valentine, who we still have to talk about on this. I think it's going to help his game a lot, because I think it's going to allow him to take a higher percentage of his shots at the basket and potentially even have less big men around the basket when he takes those shots.
And it does bear mentioning that this is not a standard, this is not the Rockets offense where they're running straight 1-5 pick and roll and Dunn is tasked with what James Harden's doing. The ball's going to move around, it's going to whip around. It's just kind of reliant on having off movement shooters, and that's what kind of makes the big combination special, is both those guys can do that a little bit. Lauri at a high level, Wendell I think can do a little bit off down screens. LaVine can do it. Parker can do it a little bit. It just comes down to Dunn. Can he really function in that kind of system, but also be the guy? I don't know. This is the thing about the Bulls, I guess. In theory, like, if you need a basket in the fourth quarter, like everybody always talks about, and you need somebody to get you put the ball in the hoop. Maybe LaVine does that. Maybe Jabari does that and takes the load off Dunn. So maybe the situation,
Jabari, right?
Yeah, I think maybe the situation is a little bit better overall than maybe I'm giving it credit for. But it's still a lot of, you have to make progressions this year as far as just an efficient score.
Yeah, and I think he's going to do that. If he doesn't do that, I start to get a little bit worried. I mean, he's going to be in the NBA for a decade just because he's going to be an incredible backup change of pace point guard defensively. But, you know, the difference between Dunn is that I still think he has the ceiling of being like a very real NBA starter who can be an all defensive team member while providing relatively efficient offense whenever you account for the passing as well. So he needs to take this year. I think it's not necessarily a make or break year, but I think it's a critical year in his development. And
I kind of agree with you overall. I mean, as far as him being the move guy on this roster in several respects, like, he is kind of the most important piece. Not as far as like being the most high level prospect in my opinion, but just the guy where the most builds off him. He has maybe the most important role as kind of the de facto initiator. So hopefully we see strides. I think he's an NBA player long term. His defense is going to be valuable in some respect, even if he's on a playoff team coming off the bench. He's going to be an NBA player. Just, can he be an impact starter? Is he going to be good enough offensively to do that?
I want to talk about Bobby Portis too. I want to give him his moment in the sun because I think he is going to be an NBA starting center. That is my strong take on Bobby Portis. I think he can be a starting center in the NBA.
Interesting. Yeah, honestly, I don't have really firm opinions on him. I didn't see enough of him last year. Every time I watched, it seemed like he was just unconscious from three. I caught one game, I think he hit like 8 threes or something. It was the Bobby Portis game, so I'm a little biased there. But overall, I'm just not sure. Is he going to be good enough defensively to be a starting caliber 5? As far as a help defender and as a rim protector, that would be my issues with him.
I don't know that it's necessarily that he's going to be good enough defensively. I don't know that he will be, but I think his combination of being legit like 6'11", being able to hit threes at a 36 to 38% clip, being able to rebound at a remarkably high level. I mean, he is someone who can actually like get 24, 25% of the defensive rebounds on the floor, be able to pass it a little bit. You look at his assist rate, 13.2% last season, keeps low turnover rates, very, very efficient PER as well. He is a stats guy more than like an eye test guy. like you watch him play and you're like, no, don't take that shot. That's bad. And he makes a lot of randomly strange decisions for a guy who does have such a low turnover rate. Again, he was a player that probably took way too many mid-range jumpers last year. Again, like right around the 325 to 350 range. Too many of those. He can't be doing that. But he is a guy that in the right offense can space the floor, can rebound, and I think can play physically inside. And that is a rare set of skills that I think a lot of teams around the NBA are looking for.
Yeah, I think you're selling me on him more as like a third big. I like his skill set overall. I think it can have value. I'm not sure if it's a starting caliber skill set on a good team, but as like one of the three bigs, if you look at this team moving forward and their bigs as far as overall with Wendell and Lauri likely starting, I have no problem with him coming off the bench as their third big. I think that actually makes some sense. With his ability to shoot the ball and with his ability to move in space defensively, I think that's fine. And if he's going to be a good rebounder, there are ways out of that. I just don't, again, I've never been enthralled with his decision-making overall. I think that that's always been his biggest bugaboo, and I always worry about those guys on good teams if they have, really high-level roles. But as a third big, he does have some allure.
Yeah, like one of my favorite trade targets for him before the Ersan Ilyasova and Brook Lopez signings was Milwaukee. Like a Sterling Brown for Bobby Portis trade to me always made a lot of sense because you could get like a legit center who could come in there and who could space the floor and rebound for Giannis. And then additionally, you could get a wing for a team that just badly needs wings in Chicago.
Yeah, I like that. That makes a lot of sense conceptually.
Yeah. How much time do we want to spend on Denzel Valentine?
It's pretty quick, man. He's pretty much worthless inside of the three-point arc. He's a three-point shooter only. He can't really create separation. He never gets to the rim. I think he dunked once last year, and I almost fell out of my chair. The thing with me that has been disappointing is his decision-making is not the same as it was at Michigan State. He just that's a disconnect between a lot of these guys. Like D'Angelo Russell's another guy like this, where they have vision, they have passing anticipation, but they just don't make the quick right reads. And I think Denzel has really struggled with the speed of the NBA game in that respect. So if he wasn't going to be a high-level secondary decision maker, he's never going to have the primary athleticism to create. But if he's not going to be that guy, he's a fringe kind of rotation wing at his highest outcome. I just don't think he's super valuable because he's not going to bring you a lot of value defensively. He's not like that fast. He doesn't chase guys off picks. He's not great at switching because he gets run through. So his value is capped if he's just a shooter.
Yeah, I think he's a rotation shooter / passer who's not going to bring you a whole lot of value defensively. Like the NBA just needs wings so badly right now that it's hard for me to see him ever like being out of the NBA as long as he keeps shooting 39 to 41% from three, which is what I am assuming he will do long term. But you also throw in the passing as well. He does make good passes. He is a guy that you can kind of have lead the break as a secondary ball handler and kind of get up the court a little bit quicker. But I agree with you that like the decision making has been a little bit slower than what I was hoping for.
And that was the key with him. I think he's still fine there, but he had to be special, I think, to compensate for the rest of his negatives, like maybe like an Andre Iguodala kind of secondary decision maker in that kind of role. And he just hasn't been that special, honestly. It's not good enough for what he is at a player in different respects. Like he just doesn't have enough as like just a shooter and a secondary creator and a decision maker to compensate for his lack of defensive acumen, his inability to really create one-on-one or even within the scheme of the offense. Like it'd be nice to run him in more pick and roll actions, but if he's not going to create any kind of separation and he's not going to make great reads out of that, even though he's capable of vision, it's just like how valuable is a guy like that?
He played 2,100 minutes last year.
Interesting.
So many minutes for a guy that like is to me like a third or fourth wing. Just so many minutes. Chandler Hutchison hopefully can take off some of that load this year. Really good playmaking wing. Can really attack closeouts well. The jump shot is a swing skill. I mean, if he can shoot it well and he can bring it on that level, he's going to be a really good player. But how do we feel about him after Summer League?
For me, I mean, he definitely passed well in the Summer League. That was the thing that stood out for me. Is he made some really nice cross-court skip pass reads. Like the guy has vision. Yep. He has execution there. It's going to come down to, like you said, it's two things for me. It is shooting shots of moon balls at Summer League. Some of these shots just didn't look very convincing.
He shoots moon balls.
Yes, when he has time and space, he's okay off the catch. I don't think he has anything off the dribble. You saw him really struggle in isolation to get by guys because he didn't have the threat of his pull-up. And then On the other side of the floor, defensively, it's team defense awareness. It's how well does he stick with guys? How well does he make rotations? He has the athleticism and the length. He has the physical tools to switch. It's how well is he in the right places off the ball.
Yeah, I think he's going to end up being something like a borderline starter / like rotation wing. I would probably take him over Denzel Valentine at this stage. But
so would I.
Yeah, like it's not necessarily like a complete package of skills either.
Yeah, that's not like the best endorsement is I'll take him in front of Denzel Valentine, but they're both they have avenues to be rotation wings for different reasons. I think that Hutchison, again, you really have to believe in the shot long term because I don't think you're getting any kind of diversity, but I love running him off of pin down actions. Like if you run a dribble handoff with like Wendell Carter and Chandler Hutchison, and Hutchison can just use his long strides in an advantage situation to get to the rim. I think that's where he can potentially add a lot of value, and that's something that Valentine can never bring.
Antonio Blakeney played really, really well at Summer League. I thought 21 points a game, 3 assists. Didn't shoot it like super well necessarily, but I'm a little bit more in on him than I was before. Like I'm not going to sit here and say that he's not worth the money that they gave him because I think they gave him 2 minimum years, right?
Yeah, I think the money's fine. Honestly, I think the Summer League is always going to make somebody like this look better. Kind of the more
it's just whether or not he's an NBA player or not. Like, do you think he's an NBA player? Basically,
I have him in my fringe, so I'm not averse to it, but I'm not really buying him as like a rotation guy. I'm not sure if he does anything really well enough. He's a scorer, and those kinds of guys, if they're not going to be like knockdown shooters and they're not going to defend, just has a ceiling, man. Like you're going to look great in Summer League when you're playing against lesser competition and you're kind of playing a less organized brand of basketball. It's how well does he fit into a team construct at the main level of NBA play? Yeah,
let's move on. Let's talk about Cleveland. They have 5 guys here I've got listed: Collin, Sexton, Cedi Osman, Larry Nance, who is still on a rookie scale contract, Ante Zizic, and I threw in Billy Preston real quick. We can knock out Preston right now. I heard his pre-draft workouts were awful. They just were not very good, and he was not someone who played super well in the couple games he played over in Bosnia. He's on a 2-year 2-way contract, so they're like committing to him for a little while, seeing if they can get anything out of him. He was athletic at Summer League, but like a little bit productive, but he wasn't anything resembling efficient whatsoever.
I think that's always been I haven't seen a ton of him, honestly, of course, because we haven't gotten the best sample there. But from the tape I have watched, he's just always been really inconsistent. Like his flash plays athletically are pretty nice, honestly. I'm not sure what his overall skill set level is. He seems to have a pretty good handle in face-up situations, but he doesn't strike me as a guy with really high feel level. And I think that, yes. So basically that.
Nope. The feel has always been the big question with Billy Preston, and he turns 21 in October, by the way. Not your typical one-and-done player in regard to age. So this is not something I would have necessarily gone down the road of. Collin Sexton, I thought played really well. We talked about him on the last podcast. He is now kind of their secondary building block at this stage. What do we think of Collin Sexton being the secondary building block for the Cleveland Cavaliers?
I mean, you always have druthers when you have an initiator who's a rookie and a young player. You're going to go through what we saw. The Mavs go through Dennis Smith. The Kings go through De'Aaron Fox. We didn't have really anything to stack up against Markelle Fultz because of the situation, of course. But anytime you have a young ball handler, it's going to be a process, especially someone like Collin Sexton where the reads aren't there yet as far as we talked about this outside of pick and roll, like the simple passes. It's going to be a long-term game with him, but at least he can come in. He gives you consistent effort on a nightly basis. All his, just plus intangibles. He's going to compete hard. He's going to score. It's just a question of how efficiently. How much does he actually defend at a high level? There's a lot of moving pieces here, but there's definitely intrigue. I think that at his ceiling outcome, he can be a very capable starter in the NBA lead guard. I just think, again, you have to temper your expectations whenever you deal with guys that aren't like incredible athletes, like Russell Westbrook type athletes who just come in the league and they really just fit right in and actually they're the best athlete on the floor. Like anybody that's less than that, even the high level skill guys, which I wouldn't even qualify as Sexton as like a really high level skill guy, it's just going to be more of a process.
Heart, Cole. Do not disregard the Collin Sexton heart factor. The grit factor. God, I sound like an old white basketball coach right now.
Yes, you do.
Cedi Osman, we didn't talk about him or Ante Zizic all that much in the last podcast, I feel like. I really liked what both of those guys showed in Summer League. Osman only played, I believe, 2 Summer League games, if I remember correctly. He was very, very impressive and should not have been playing more than 2 Summer League games, despite the fact that he did not really shoot it all that well. He is so far beyond that level.
Yeah, and honestly, I didn't get to see him in person because I saw Sexton before in the games that I saw Sexton play. Cedi did not play in, so I don't have a great feel on his Summer League performance, but I think it's going to come down to just the general shooting. He was 36, almost 37% from 3 last season, playing for the Cavs. If he hits that shot, I love the energy he brought to that Cavs team. That's the one thing I'll say about him is he plays hard, and he has kind of an infectious energy that kind of governs him on the floor. So that's what I like from him as far as a wing type, and they could definitely use someone like that. Use that enhanced. He's not like a crazy athlete, of course, but utilizing someone who just plays harder makes less athletic guys a little bit more athletic, and that's something that this Cavs team needed. They needed that injection from Larry Nance. They need it from Cedi Osman, in my opinion.
Yeah, and with him and Collin Sexton on the floor at the same time, there is going to be a lot of that energy. I think that Osman is a very underrated athlete. He does get separation whenever I've seen him. He actually does get his way into the lane whenever he really tries to drive and uses it off of the threat of his jump shot. I'm a pretty big fan of his game. I think he can be a good 6th man, maybe 5th starter.
Yeah, I have him in my rotation kind of tier 3, kind of fringe starter type. So I like him. He's with Sexton to me. I think Sexton's upside is obviously higher than him, but I like them two the most out of the prospects on this roster.
Yeah, and then Zizic is the last guy we should mention here. I mean, this is a roster, by the way, that has 4 guys under the age of 25. That's a problem when you're trying to retool a little bit. And I guess Larry Nance too. Larry Nance is what he is. To me, he's a really solid rotational big man who will play in the NBA for a while.
Exactly right.
Energetic, probably want him as a bench guy. He's not a guy who's going to space the floor, not a guy who's going to protect the rim super well. Just an energetic guy who's going to grab offensive rebounds, who's going to get the rest of his teammates going. He's a fantastic teammate from what I've been told in general. So great dude to have around. But Ante Zizic is fascinating to me in many ways because I am firmly on team Ante Zizic is good at basketball. I just don't know if it translates to the NBA, maybe is the way to put it. I'm unconvinced that his athleticism level is going to play well at the next level.
Yeah, see, for me, I've just never seen him look great. I mean, I thought he looked okay this summer league. He's huge. If you watch him in person, that dude is enormous. He was moving Wendell Carter around easily in the post. He's just a big dude. I've just never seen him really. He was out of shape last year in summer league. He didn't move that well. Is he going to space the floor? He looks to me just kind of like a dive guy, but like a seal guy. He'll pick and roll, but he'll seal a mismatch or something like that. How valuable is that in the modern game? I don't know. He's definitely a backup center to me. I don't see him as a starting center in any good team. But if he can be a rotational big, if he can be a backup 5, I think that's a fine outcome for him.
Yeah, that's what I've always loved about him. He has incredible fundamentals in the pick and roll. He's a really, really good screen setter. He's great at sealing off his opposing player. He has really great timing, rolling to the basket, finding that open area as well. Great touch around the basket as well, but he's not an above the rim finisher. Everything is layup. Everything is weird, looping hook shot kind of. Very, very bizarre watching him play basketball in many ways, given what we're used to. But he's a very talented player. If he doesn't make it in the NBA, I think he's going to be one of the 10 best players in Europe at some point. I legit think that's his talent level. And then you throw in the fact that he is absolutely an elite offensive rebounder. I think he's a very, very good defensive rebounder as well. Just a fascinating player to watch. And I don't necessarily know. I'd say the ceiling is something like Marcin Gortat, maybe. But okay. I don't know if he gets there. I think it's probably more he's a good bench backup center.
Yeah, and again, I've just never seen that athleticism to make me think he's a Gortat type. But again, I haven't seen him a lot at lower levels where he really impressed clearly a lot of people. Yeah, so
he is a little bit worse of an athlete than Gortat. That's true.
He can be a rotation guy for me. I've always seen his game fitting better in other leagues, like European leagues. I think that he would be potentially a devastating player. It's just the NBA, the way it's trending. Is he going to be good enough offensively, beating switches, beating guys inside? He's not as big. He's not as big as Yusuf Nurkic, is he? As far as just general size and girth.
No, not quite. I mean, he's probably
simple.
like 7 foot 260, whereas Nurkic is like 7 foot like 280.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe like that kind of player, like, conceptually, I'm just, again, I don't know what that ceiling looks like in the modern game. It's not very high. I would invest in other kinds of bigs if I had my personal selection. But again, I think he could be one of the 15 players on an NBA roster for sure.
Yeah, like Nurkic, maybe he can be like a more controlled version of Nurkic, because like Nurkic does stupid shit all the time on the floor.
Yes, he does.
So like maybe it's maybe he's not as strong and not as skilled as Nurkic, but he cuts out all the terrible stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's an avenue to potentially, getting maybe regular season spot starting minutes, and then in the playoffs you're going to be relegated to a more reserve role. But yeah, if he's an NBA player, that's a win.
Yeah, let's move on. Let's talk about Detroit. They have 5 guys I've got listed here. I have Luke Kennard at number 1. I actually really liked his rookie season a lot. Didn't have to play summer league after a rookie season. That's typically a good sign, or at least I don't remember seeing him play summer league, right?
I don't think he did. No.
Yeah, like he was actually really good throughout the NBA season, so I don't know why he would have to. Shot 42% from 3, was a really, really good passer. Held down a rotation spot like with ease, I thought.
Really awesome jump shooter. I mean, overall, his mechanics are sound. He can come off motion. He can run a secondary pick and roll. I think he's got some craft to his game. That was always his thing. He's not a high level athlete, but maybe a little bit deceptive there as far as how his defense translated to not being. I don't think his defense was horrendous, but just I guess sticking with offense right now, he can run a pick and roll. He has enough passing acumen to make reads out of there. Not the best finisher around the rim. I don't think he's ever going to be that, even though he has pretty damn good touch, but just the explosiveness isn't there. He impressed me. Again, he's going to get remembered in negative fashion because where he went in the draft relative to other prospects who went around him. But I think he's going to be pretty solid.
No, yeah, I think he's going to be a very useful basketball player for Detroit. Like, if he ended up being a starter this year for Detroit, I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up averaging like 14 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists this year in like 30 minutes. Like, that seems possible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In that role, especially, they need wings who can shoot for sure. They have for so long, especially playing around Blake Griffin and Andre Drummond. He's the kind of guy you want to fit in. It's just a question of how good does his defense get? Can he be salvageable on the floor? I thought last year, from what the minutes I saw, and granted, I didn't see a ton of Detroit basketball, but from what I did watch, I don't think he was untenable defensively. I thought he held up better than I thought he would. Still don't expect any kind of plus contribution from there, but the positional size he has and just the general awareness and IQ are going to help him.
And then there's Stanley Johnson. He is in a weird spot just because he'll be a restricted free agent next summer. Hasn't really figured out the right role, in large part because of the jump shooting. Like, he's not quite a stretch 4 because he can't hit threes. He is a guy that can kind of take advantage of 4s athletically because he's a little bit quicker than they are and he can kind of get around them occasionally. I like the fact that he was able to mostly start a lot of games this year, but I mean, like, I thought he was like a definite NBA starter coming out of college, and I think he's a bench player now.
God, it's really tough. This is one of the most interesting extension candidates to me, just because I feel like you can get value here if he hits. Like, you can get him at a lower value. If he starts shooting the ball well, that becomes a starting caliber player to me. I mean, his off-ball defense, I've never been super enthralled with it, but as a switch guy, this guy's super strong. He's a combo forward type, probably one of the hardest archetypes to find in the league right now, a guy who can defend bigger wings and also swing to the 4. It just comes down to the shooting, and there's just not a lot to be super positive about. He does have a pull-up game, which I always look for with these guys. If you can functionally shoot off the dribble a little bit, he took 112 attempts last season. That is indicative to me somewhat. I mean, I'm not sure this is statistically proven or not, but just for me personally, this is kind of the input I look at. If he can do that, and he shoots, I think if you get him at, say, like 10 to 12 million a year or something like that, and he really hits, then you have that surplus value in your contract. It's just, these are one of the few situations where I think that's possible for a wing, where someone has overall disappointed relative to expectations. He hasn't been the starting level player, but if that shot starts to go, I think, again, you're getting some surplus value in that contract.
That feels like so much money for him.
It does.
It really
like
does. So much money for him. Like, he's not as good of a defender as Solomon Hill, right?
Oh God, I mean that's
like,
tough.
Because like Solomon Hill is like a good defender in the NBA, but that's like the archetype that Stanley Johnson would be going for, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
Not a good jump shooter. Like, we can just kind of call that what it is after 3 years of seeing this. Like, maybe you have some hope on it, but like I don't know. I don't know that I do. But the biggest problem for him is he's a poor finisher around the basket. He was in the 10th percentile last year, only made 43% of his half-court shots around the basket. And in Detroit, like with how crowded that area is going to be with Andre Drummond and Blake Griffin around, I don't think that he really has an avenue to like success there.
Yeah, and that was an issue in college for him too, by the way. Like, the finishing, he was never a high-level finisher.
He's not a super explosive leaper.
Yep. And that's something that I guess he got pigeonholed as more of this like hyper athlete when you got to look at different kinds of leaping ability there. But overall, yeah, 10th percentile finishing around the basket in the half court. Runners, 3 of 14 on runners. He was. I felt like he was okay on those in college, which inked against some natural touch ability. But if you can't score efficiently from any area of the floor in the modern game, if you can't shoot and you're not like a dynamic decision maker, which he isn't, like he can function in a secondary pick and roll setting, but on that team, the ball's always going to be with Blake. It's going to be with Kennard. You're going to be getting Drummond the ball on lobs. Is he really going to be put in those situations? It's mostly about can he shoot, and that's kind of the dice roll that you're betting on, honestly.
Man, when you said that, like, you know, you get him on a contract and can be a bargain, I thought you were going to say like 6 to 8 million, and then you pulled out like 10 to 12, and I was like, whoa, that is risky.
I was using like the XM contract as kind of like a little bit of an input there, somewhere around that. I guess you could say more conservative, like a $9 to $12 million range. I think you have to factor in some of the upside, otherwise he's not going to take the deal. But yeah, that's what makes it so tough for him, because if you're actually in that spot where you're offering that contract, I wouldn't feel confident at all. But in the event that it does hit, it becomes one of the most valuable, not one of the most valuable contracts in the league, but for a wing player, it becomes a real asset.
Yeah, I get that. Let's talk about the next two guys on this list, which probably won't be too exciting for Pistons fans. I've got Bruce Brown and Khyri Thomas. They both look good at Summer League, I thought. Bruce showed a lot of the same shit that he struggled with in Miami and showed some of the great positives that make him a potential useful rotation wing/guard in the NBA. And then Khyri Thomas, I think, is going to be like a good rotation wing in the NBA. Like, he can really shoot the ball and he can really defend.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I mean, they both looked absolutely to form in Summer League. I didn't notice anything new from them. They were kind of just as is. I have them in tier 4. How I rank these guys is more rotation, kind of fringe types, but more rotation oriented. I think I'm a little bit higher on them than I was before. I don't know. I guess they just look more fluid to me on the NBA stage as far as in Summer League. I have them definitely a notch below Luke Kennard and even Stanley Johnson at this juncture. I think I'd bet on Stanley Johnson's shot over Bruce Brown's at this point. I just don't think Bruce has ever shown any kind of indication he can shoot pull-ups or off-movement or anything. He's basically a catch-and-shoot guy. Yep. He doesn't even do that well. So I get what they're trying to get at, though. I liked both picks. I like Bruce Brown and Khyri Thomas. I didn't have them in my top 27, but in the second round, these are the kind of guys you want to take dice rolls on, especially Bruce Brown, because if he shoots, he does have some secondary playmaking. He has the defensive switchability to potentially be good there.
Stanley Johnson versus Khyri Thomas it's a question for me. I'll say that.
It's fair.
And like, that's not even like a statement on Stanley Johnson. I mean, it's a little bit of one, but I do mean it more as like, I am pretty high on Khyri Thomas figuring it out and being like good at basketball in the NBA. I've got Henry Ellenson last here.
So do I.
He should probably get his option declined. That's just kind of where I'm at.
Yes, he should. I have him in the fringe category or the fringe tier here. Jaren Jackson just eviscerated him from planet Earth in that Summer League game at Cox. He's a shooter who doesn't shoot well enough to be a rotation player, in my opinion. He's not going to give you basically any value anywhere else. You can't play him at the 5. He doesn't move well enough. You can't play him at the 4 because then you trade off the skills, and he's not going to be, again, you can't move well enough defensively. He just has to be that kind of pick and pop 5 spacing threat to have rotation value, and I just don't see it.
Forget like Jaren Jackson. I saw DJ Wilson destroy him at Summer League. Like, he shot 29% at Summer League. He shot 16.7% from 3 as a stretch 5 shooter. I mean, like, I root for everyone to succeed. I would like to see him figure some things out, but I'm not seeing it like in any way, really. Oh,
hell no, I'm with you. I would like seeing players succeed and stuff, and we'll get to DJ Wilson. He's going to make an appearance on this list in the same category.
Yeah.
Damn, it was not a very... I don't know how you could be anything but highly skeptical about Henry Ellenson at this point. I just don't see a lot salvageable in his game.
Yeah, I agree. Miles Turner is the first guy we're going to talk about on the Indiana Pacers. Interesting season for Miles Turner. Like, just didn't really take the step forward that I think everyone was hoping for from him. Kind of didn't play as many minutes this year because they started to use Domantas Sabonis a lot more. And, we can talk about whether or not you think Domantas Sabonis or Miles Turner is a better long-term piece, because I kind of think that's up for debate a little bit. But I would still take Miles at this stage because I like the ceiling of having a guy who can really space the floor and who can really protect the rim. The passing, I think, is a worry. The rebounding, I think, is a little bit of a worry too, to be honest. Yep. He just is not a good enough rebounder because he gets moved around pretty easily. Only a 19.9 defensive rebounding rate last year. Really struggles to keep his position after he's established it. But if he can just keep shooting, keep protecting the rim, and then continue to put on lower body strength, which if you remember throughout his pre-draft process, that was something that they really worked on because he had the very strange running gait throughout his late high school years and his college year at Texas.
Yep.
I hope that they can continue to add lower body strength to him, but that's kind of the swing skill for me. Like, he needs to be able to keep adding lower body strength so that he can be a better finisher at the basket and so that he can be a legit rebounder inside.
Yeah, for me, it's pretty convoluted here overall. I don't think he moves as well in space as some gave him credit for. I know the gate issues, but that was more of like a running issue, changing ends. That's kind of how he got compared to like a Serge Ibaka. He doesn't move like that. But I think in space, of course, like LeBron's going to take advantage of those guys. But you saw the way that Cleveland hunted him in the playoffs as far as on mismatches. He doesn't move that well. And he is a really good rim protector. Like, when he's in the area, he does make rotations. I'm not sure if he's like an outlier defensive awareness guy. He's pretty good, but I don't know if he's special enough to compensate for his lack of ability to play pick and roll defense. He's more of a drop guy to me. You want to drop him like midway down in the key so we can utilize his standing reach. And the rebounding point, I think, was spot on. I'm also not sure if he's good enough beating mismatches inside as far as adeptness. He can get to that. What he does is that mid-range shot where he just turns over his right shoulder, that fadeaway. Yep. I think that's a really useful shot. He uses that a lot. And he is a good finisher for the most part around the rim. He's not crazy good, but he's above average. So I don't think it's necessarily a weakness. Unless he becomes like a proficient, like right now he's a pretty good three-point shooter. I think I would buy his touch as real overall for a big. I think that he's okay in pick and pops.
He can definitely shoot. Like, I have no worries. He shot 49% from 16 to 23 feet last year, like doing a lot of that stuff that you just mentioned, like that little turnover at the, like, for instance, to the left elbow. He takes a lot of those shots. He takes a lot of shots at the top of the key as well. Like, he can really make that shot. And then additionally, he is a good three-point shooter. Like, he shot nearly 37% from three this year, but there's not a whole lot of versatility there because he does get his momentum knocked off pretty easily because the center of gravity is off due to that lack of lower body strength. Exactly.
And I think the shooting overall is what I buy the most with him. I just buy the touch. Yeah. Like you noted, I think he's going to be able to be like a pretty steadily positive volume three-point shooter on decent efficiency. I think that's definitely within his range of outcomes, and he has to be that because I don't know. We saw this again. This is kind of building into Domantas Sabonis a little bit. I had them grouped in the same tier here because they're way different players. Like, as far as they need,
couldn't imagine two more different players.
The Pacers need both of these guys. Like,
they do.
Like, we saw Miles Turner, his lack of passing acumen, his lack of dribbling coordination is going to get exploited at the highest levels of play when they start trapping Oladipo. Like, he's just not that good there. He's not good at making decisions on the move. He's basically a pick and pop guy, kind of like how Zach Collins profiles to be for the Trailblazers. That kind of player where I think maybe the skill level is a little overrated and they just don't have the decision making really innately to be in that role. So, yeah, for me, Miles Turner is a pick and pop big. He's a spread five who hopefully he can definitely beat guys on mismatches in the post as far as that turnaround. That's pretty much unguardable. And then you just hope that maybe he can improve his quickness a little bit defending the perimeter to make him salvageable there, and then he can really protect the rim. So I'm not out on him by any means, but I think he's clearly a tier behind a guy like Kristaps Porzingis. Are you with that?
Yeah, no, I definitely think he is.
Okay.
In terms of shots contested at the basket last season, it's worth mentioning that he contested the second most shots at the basket per game of any player in the league outside of Clint Capella. But opponents did shoot like 60% against him at the basket. I do think that he goes for the block a little bit more often than what you would expect. Clint Capella has a little bit of that in his game too. Opponents shot 60% against Clint Capella at the basket as well. But that stuff is, I think, fixable at least for players with length and who have good shot blocking instincts. I think that they just kind of learn as they play more in the NBA what they can and can't get to blocking shots. So I have hope that Miles Turner will be like an elite level rim protector at some point. I think he probably will be. But right now he's an elite level shot blocker as opposed to an elite level rim protector. And the latter is more valuable than the former.
Absolutely right. And I think that kind of speaks to the decision making not necessarily being elite. It's more like he has the physical tools. He's definitely a problem around the rim, and he has instincts. It's just not top level enough to where he can compensate for the rest of his game defensively as far as moving in space and just as a team defender. Yeah,
and then Domantas Sabonis, you mentioned the ability to put the ball on the deck and really attack mismatches because of his size, because he's so strong. For a guy that's like a little skinny, like 6'10" dude, like he is strong as shit. And it's really hard to stop his momentum when he gets going, and he can embrace contact and finish physically through it. Defensively, he's really smart. He can really guard out in space. I think that was one of the more underrated skills that people didn't talk about enough with him pre-draft. Like Gonzaga used to throw him on Kyle Collinsworth, like BYU's like kind of do it all point guard, and just say, go guard him out in space. We trust you. And he could do that. He was a smart rim protector who learned from, Tommy Lloyd and Donnie Daniels and Brian Michelson and that staff up there under Mark Few. They do a great job of teaching verticality up there. He can put the ball on the deck. He's great in dribble handoff situations, particularly, which helps with a guy like Victor Oladipo, who you can sprint up from the corner and who can turn that corner and get into the lane or take that pull-up jump shot because Sabonis is so smart with moving screens. Really, really just an excellent basketball player. I love Domantas Sabonis.
Yeah, he's definitely, to me, at worst, like a third big. I think that's ideally what you want him as anyway, but I really like him in that role because of the playmaking attributes that he brings to the table. He's going to be really useful in certain matchups. Again, referencing that Cleveland matchup where they just need a big who can make decisions on a short roll. And he can make passes to the corner. He can dribble well enough. He has that kind of double spin move. He's very coordinated with the ball, very skilled with great touch. So there's going to be roles where he's valuable. And again, like I think he started his career with the Thunder as more of like a straight stretch four. That's not what he's great at. He's not like a pure kind of spacing threat. What he's better at as a playmaker. And I think Indiana's done a really good job of leveraging that, especially at the 5, and especially during the regular season. Like he's a valuable big to have in the rotation. I really like him as a player.
Yeah, I think he's like a legit very good NBA player. To me, he is a starting quality center in the NBA. You're giving away some stuff whenever he's on the floor. Like he's not ever going to be an elite level rim protector, but I think you gain a lot more than you give back when he's on the floor.
Yeah, for me, again, this is kind of getting at Bobby Portis, and I think that I like Sabonis more than Bobby Portis as a player overall.
I agree with that.
But it's more about like on a good team, what are you? And for me, on a good team, Sabonis is a third big, but potentially valuable one. He can be a starting caliber player in this league, though. I think that that's very much a possibility. It's just, do you really profile that team to be an elite team? That's where I have my druthers, because defensively, like you said, he does move his feet. He's very technically sound. But his biggest issue, like so many of these guys, is the lack of length, the lack of reach, the lack of leaping ability in conjunction with that as a rim protector, defending on the ball, even contesting shots at times. So he's going to struggle there. It's impossible for him to get that much better there because he already knows where to be. He makes good rotations. It's just there's some things that you can't improve upon because they're physical tools related, and that's what he has to deal with. But he's doing a great job of maximizing what he has to work with for sure.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Where do you want to go to next with the Pacers? Because they have like a big conglomeration of like interesting players.
So in my tier 4, I only had one prospect, and that's Aaron Holiday. I was never the biggest Holiday guy, honestly, as far as like value in the draft. I'm just not a big fan of taking backup point guards in the first round when they're fungible and you can replace them. Holiday, I think, is going to be a long-term backup point guard, though. He just shoots the hell out of the ball so well, and he can play off Oladipo as a floor spacer, one of the best catch-and-shoot three-point shooters for lead guards we've seen coming into the league in a while. We're talking like 99th percentile every year of his career. So I think he can shoot the ball. He can play pick and roll. I think his athleticism is a little overrated, honestly, overall. His decision-making, to me, is overrated as like a pure lead guard. But for the role he's going to play on this team, I think that he stands out above the rest of these lot as far as rotation quality.
Yeah, and I think that he can be like a borderline starting point guard too. Not a guy that you want like on a great team to be your point guard, but he's kind of the perfect role player point guard in my opinion. He's going to be able to run pick and rolls. He's going to be able to shoot from distance, both in pull-ups and off the catch. He's a great defender. He really passes well. He keeps everyone involved. He is, in many ways, very similar to their current point guard, Darren Collison, except maybe he's a little bit better defensively. So, yeah, I mean, like, I think he's going to have a long NBA career as, like, kind of a, you know, good point guard that, you know, maybe you have as a backup starting option, but you're not disappointed when he's starting for you.
The Pacers are like the second installment of UCLA here. My God, just looking at all these prospects, TJ Leaf, Ike Anabogu. If you want to transition into those guys now, I have a giant tier of fringe guys for these players.
Yeah, I'm not real sure what to do with TJ Leaf. I was not like wildly high on him in the last draft. I did not have him as a first round prospect in the last draft process. He is like an interesting shooter, kind of. He can pass it a little bit, but I've always just been worried about the athleticism at this level. And I've always been worried about the fact that he tries to embrace contact, but has never really been like a free throw shooter at all. Not really ever going to be like a great rebounder because he has very skinny shoulders and has a very skinny waist. And like, I think it's going to be hard for him to put on a ton of muscle mass. Like, never has been a good defender. It's hard for me to see what his role is unless he's like a 42% 3-point shooter.
Yeah, and it's weird because he struggles so much with physicality, and the Pacers notoriously, they kind of, one of their main driving forces and prospects, in my opinion, is like mental and physical toughness. And I don't know if TJ Leaf is ever going to have that physical toughness side. He's more of a finesse player. I think his skill level is a little underrated, but it kind of, again, might be in the more Dragan Bender sense where how functional is it on an NBA floor? How much does the dribbling and passing, attack, and closeouts actually matter? It's more just about the shot. I think he can get there off the catch. I'm not super concerned about him being like a bad shooter or anything. But the thing about stretch fours, and I think that's what TJ Leaf is for one, they're kind of getting pushed out of the league. When you're like a hybrid 4-5 and you can't play the 5 full time and you're a kind of a bigger player, that's a really tough sell in the modern game, especially when you don't have a lot of versatility to your game. So if you're Kevin Love and you can just kill mismatches in the post, that helps you. If you're Lauri Markkanen and you can do that kind of same thing, shoot over the top, that gives you avenues to kind of beat these guys. I think TJ Leaf is another one of those guys that just the league kind of bypassed in the last couple of years.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. He's like a tweener 4-5 who just might not be good enough offensively.
Exactly.
I have Edmund Sumner next on this list. I liked what I saw of him at Summer League. Like, he's super quick, twitchy. He's 6'6". He's a little bit long. He's athletic as hell. Not a shooter, but maybe like a borderline rotation guy.
Yeah, I think that, you know, his ability to get to the rim is my thing with him. It's kind of what I've always liked. It's kind of like, he's not quite the athlete. Maybe he is. It's like Troy Williams. He kind of always reminded me of that kind of player where the burst game to the basket, that's what he brings, that overall athleticism, but just not really a shooter. So it's how well does that really translate? I understood taking the dice roll on him. I think it was smart as far as I do think that maybe could be a role for him down the road, but I'm gravitating away from these wing types who aren't necessarily the best creators for others who can't shoot. I just don't know how much of a role you're going to find with that in the modern game, but I do think he can be on the 15-man roster. He can potentially be a rotation guy. I'm just not super high on him.
Alize Johnson, I have next. Just kind of a 6'9", tough rebounder who has potential to maybe shoot it a little bit.
His rebounding really impressed me. I watched him up close. That was the Trae Young game, I believe, and his rebounding's really impressive. Like on offensive glass and stuff, he really fights. Again, just how valuable is that whole package if he doesn't shoot? All these guys, all the fringe guys in the league, most of them, especially if you aren't like a pure 5, you have to shoot the ball for the most part, unless you're just an elite level defensive player. Yeah,
not real sure what to make of his game because I don't know that I buy the shot, but if it does come along, I think he's an NBA player. Kind of a perfect Pacers guy. Ike Anabogu has struggled with injuries kind of throughout his career. I don't know that he's ever going to make a ton out of his career, I guess.
Yeah, and this is something we've talked about on the podcast numerous times about drafting, and this is fine to draft him where they did, drafting developmental bigs, and just the downside of that, like, just draft the wing. You know what I mean? Like, Ike, it's hard to say because he struggled so much with injuries and stuff, so it's kind of like a throwaway here because he hasn't really gotten a real chance, but you can just get these guys in free agency for, like, the minimum. Why, don't draft them.
Yeah, totally agree. I never really totally got it with him at UCLA. Ben Moore I have on here. I can see you randomly being a Ben Moore stan. Is that accurate?
I love SMU guys, dude. Like,
I knew it.
So Yeah, he's always I've always been intrigued. Some guys I respect were always high on him. I didn't get a chance to watch him too much at SMU, but he had a crossover play where he finished a dunk. I had no idea he could handle the ball like that. And I don't know if it was just a flash in the pan in Summer League, but it was a legit one of the best plays I saw at Summer League. Was this crossover move, explodes off 1 foot and dunks. So I'm going to be watching him closely. I like the SMU guys. Most of those guys are really cerebral. It's just going to come down to, can he shoot the ball? Can he space the floor? But I like the dice roll here by the Pacers.
Yeah, and like theoretically, I don't think he's actually on this roster. I think his two-way expired, and he's a free agent and played with them in Summer League. But I kind of wanted to bring up Ben Moore because I like him a little bit. Not a lot, just a little bit.
Yeah, I'm looking at this list overall, and Elijah Stewart just signed a summer contract with them. I think out of all these guys, Ben Moore might be near the top for me, frankly. I'm not really high on any of them, so if I had to prioritize them, this is after Aaron Holiday, again, who's a tier above as far as I do think he's going to be a rotation caliber player. But out of all these other guys, I think I might actually favor Ben Moore over all the rest.
That is a take. I'm here for it. Let's move to the Bucks. I put these guys in order. I have Malcolm Brogdon first. I put him on this list because, again, he's still on that first contract. Obviously, the Rookie of the Year. Very limited player. I think it's fair to say he is probably the oldest player we'll talk about, given the fact that he turns 26 in December. But to me, he is the third most important player, I think, on this Bucks roster right now because of his defensive versatility, his ability to shoot it from distance, his ability to play point guard as a bigger point guard. I will say, though, that I thought this year was, even though his counting stats took a small step forward, was a little bit of a step back because he showed some weird stuff defensively where he'd get lost off ball and doesn't make like the quick decision pass that you really are hoping for from a guy like him. He needs to just whip it around instead of taking like a quick little dribble every single time he touches the ball. This stuff is fixable though. Like I think he's going to be a good player for them.
I do too. I think he deserves the benefit of the doubt in several respects. Like I'm not high on his upside by any means. I think that he actually is a little bit more limited than he gets credit for. I mean, he can switch a little bit. He can guard point guards, but he's not ultra quick. He's not going to contain these guys in isolation or in pick and roll consistently. He's just more solid than anything else in so many respects. Like he can space the floor, and that's huge around Giannis. You need guys that can, make catch and shoot shots, and unguarded, he was like 70.6% adjusted field goal percentage last year off the catch when he was unguarded. It's good. It's a good 90th percentile. So you can see when he's open, he makes shots. And for the Bucks, you have to have shooting around Giannis. That's just the number one thing. So from that vantage point, I think he's done enough in the league to merit being the top prospect here, even though I think the second most important or the third most important player on the Bucks roster is actually Sterling Brown.
We can talk about this because I think it's a bananas take. Tell me why you are as high on Sterling Brown as you are.
I think that Sterling, if he loses weight, is more versatile defensively than Malcolm is. I think he can switch more. He can defend. He's big. Like Sterling's really big as far as just a general frame. Like I think he's more switchable than Malcolm is, defending more like wings, even force. He can leverage position and stuff like that. And I think that Sterling is really good.
Hold on. Like when you say switchable, I don't know that I would say he's more switchable. Like Malcolm can guard ones. I don't think Sterling can guard ones.
I don't think Malcolm can really guard ones well, though. That's the thing is I do think that Sterling can definitely leverage his strength better than Malcolm can guard ones, if that makes sense.
Maybe. I can see that. Okay.
So
I'll retract. Go ahead.
And I do think that right now your position is right in that I think there's more reason based on what Brogdon's already showed in the league. He deserves the benefit of the doubt here overall. But I do think long term Sterling can, hit shots off the catch. He can shoot a little bit off motion. And that dude just plays insanely hard. Like that's a thing that you noticed watching the Bucks last year is that dude just goes 110% all the time. He's high activity. He's chippy. I think he's kind of just what that team needs is like a bigger wing who is a good team defender, doesn't make mistakes off the ball because that's where Tony Snell really struggles, man. Like he's not good off the ball defensively, and that's what kills them. Is he just makes so many blunders. And for what the Bucks need, I think maybe you can argue that Brogdon is the better player. I think that's an easy argument right now, especially. But as far as what they need, as far as importance, they just need one more of those wing guys they can slide in next to Middleton and Giannis who can really, shoot the ball off the catch, a little bit off motion, and then defend in a team construct. And I think that Sterling is really the only guy in this roster that provides them with that set of skills. Well,
why is that not Brogdon? Like, why wouldn't you just play Bledsoe with Brogdon, get more? I mean, he's a better shooter than Sterling, I think. You get more shooting. you get more playmaking, you get more ball handling ability, and you might give back a little bit defensively, but it's not like Malcolm's a bad defender 2 through 4.
Yeah, I just think like again against the bigger wings, especially the teams that they're going to play against, like Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, they whip Brogdon's ass pretty good, and they're going to do that to most smaller guys. Like they're just too athletic, they're too big for someone like that. I think that Sterling can hang better with those guys. Again, not top level athlete, but he does. I think he's a little bit better athlete than he gets credit for, and he again makes up for some of that gap in just his awareness and how hard he tries, how high his motor burns. I do think he's a pretty damn good off the catch shooter, and that's going to prove to be the case in time. He was in college, so I don't have a lot of issues with him. He's not going to play like pick and roll at a high level, but he can even hit pull-up jumpers. Like he was 13 of 26 on pull-ups last year. Who knows? I mean, obviously not a great sample, but just saying that this guy has a little bit more shot diversity in his game. He was 12 of 23 on unguarded catch and shoot shots in the half court. I just don't think he's gotten really a fair shake yet, and I'm very curious to see what happens if he does.
So he weighed in at 230 last year. Well, what do we think he came in at Summer League at?
Oh, son of a bitch. Higher.
He looked like he looked 6'6", 250 at Summer League.
He looked like he ate Jabari Parker. I'm dead serious. When I first saw him, that's my thought that went through my head. I was like, dude, you're too big. Like he was big before, and then seeing him in person, I was like, that there's no way that's Sterling. That's one of those guys where it's like Dang Adele for me. Like I didn't know he was that big, and seeing him in person, I was like, who the hell is that? Like even that was Sterling. And I knew who he was, but it was like, good God, dude, you're too big.
Yeah, like he even looked way bigger than he did last year. Like I've seen him in person. He was not that big last year. It didn't seem like.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's even on TV, like he looked more cut than that. Like he looked noticeably uncut.
Yeah. Good Lord. Thon Maker still exists. He plays well in the playoffs, which I think is something that is absolutely worth mentioning. They did kind of free agent sign over him by signing Brook Lopez and Ersan Ilyasova. I think that was more of a statement that they don't really believe in Thon's jumper than anything. I mean, he's a good complement to those guys defensively because he can really move his feet. Obviously, he's a better shot blocker than both of those guys are. But, I mean, the key for him is the jump shot, because I don't think he's ever really going to be a guy that holds and establishes his position inside. I mean, we're talking about a 14% defensive rebounding rate here, a 49% true shooting percentage. And the true shooting percentage largely happens because he can't really score inside. He's a very, very tough evaluation. I think we got, not we, because I wasn't really all that excited, but like a lot of people got very excited about him coming into this season because of the great playoffs. But we knew that he played hard. We knew that he was athletic. The question is, where does the jump come from with his frame and with his jump shot? And I don't really know that I've seen it yet.
The Bucks were second worst in the league last year in the regular season in defensive rebounding rate, and that is very easily seen when you watch them play. Like I don't know if I've ever seen Thon Maker grab a contested rebound. He struggles with physicality, his strength. He just doesn't give you a lot of traditional big man. He can protect the rim, of course. He just doesn't give you that girth inside, that presence, that physical presence on either side of the ball. He's purely a spacer on offense. He was billed kind of coming into the draft by a lot of people as this kind of like point center, point forward type. I've never seen the ball handling coordination in a real game. You see the flashes as far as him in workouts and skill drills, and he looks really fluid actually on a lot of those drills, but I've never seen it translate into NBA space. And if he's just going to be a pick and pop guy, he's going to have to shoot better from three than 33% from his career. He's going to have to up that into the high 30s because he's not giving you any kind of ability to beat a switch. I don't trust him in the post as far as even against wing players. I don't think he has that kind of girth. He's not a great passer overall. So where is he really bringing value? But I do think, as far as value as a starting caliber player on a good team, but I do think he's another one of those situational bigs where there's going to be matchups. There's going to be times where you need a guy who can switch. You need a guy who can protect the rim. And then play in theory 5-out basketball, and he's going to be able to do that well.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of that there. He can definitely move in space better than most players can, I guess, is the way to put it. Like, he can actually really, really move whenever he has to guard pick and rolls and whenever he has to, slide and kind of recover. There's a lot there, don't get me wrong, but I just don't know what to even think of what his long-term ceiling is. Now, you mentioned the fact that, you know, his contested defensive rebounds, like he just never grabs contested defensive rebounds. The analytics on him like are not terrible on that, at least. I think he's like middle of the pack in terms of that. Like he's right around like 40th out of 75 centers last year who played 40 games. So maybe he can do that a little bit better as he continues to like get stronger. But again, like I don't know where the strength comes from. Like he's an incredibly hard worker. He plays with a great energy. He's someone that like the Bucks love having around because he is just like, if you talk to him, he is just such a good dude. Like he comes in every day, works his ass off, and plays with just such energy and really wants to be there. But I don't know, man. Like I just don't know where it comes from.
I agree. And I think, again, I'm getting back to, I think he's a rotation big. I think he can provide value in certain matchups. I'm just not sure if he does things well enough. And especially we need to mention that it's not just in a vacuum we're talking about here. It's next to Giannis, who plays a lot of the 4. You got to have a better rebounder at the 5 if you're going to kind of, I mean, Giannis is huge, but not like the greatest rebounder of all time, right? You need to kind of insulate him a little bit on the glass because that's kind of what they've always struggled with, was finding a guy who could both rebound and space the floor around him and play 5 out. Brook Lopez isn't notoriously the best rebounder, but he's much bigger and he can space the floor. So I think that, in theory, was kind of what the Bucks were getting at, is let's just get a bigger presence here who can also play 5 out and aid Giannis in that respect.
Let's move on. Dante DiVincenzo. I probably like Dante. I don't know if I like him a little bit more than some of these guys. Like he's like right in this mix, I guess, with like all of these players. Like just because I have him 4th here, like I wouldn't say that he is a worse asset than some of these guys. Like he's exactly what they need. They need a guy who can go get a bucket, who can just be fearless off the bench, and who isn't gonna shrink from the moment, and who can actually create his own in an efficient manner because he can shoot off the dribble a little bit. Like that stuff is very valuable to me, but it's also just kind of like he's still going to be limited defensively. He's not like a lead guard. It's kind of a tough spot.
Yeah, I had him a tick below the 3 other guys that we talked about, still as a rotation caliber player, but just a tick below, just because I don't believe in the defense as far as I don't think he's that great of a team defender, his switchability. I've never been enthralled with his decision-making on either side of the floor. They do need shooting, but when you look at the teams that they're going to have to go against, again, I think he's going to be a liability in so many respects. He's really going to have to be a high-level shooter, off movement, off the catch. He can get there. He has good footwork. Villanova's footwork is notorious for being excellent, the best in the country with Jay Wright and all of that. We'll see if he's that level of overall shooter. I like Kevin Huerter here more than DiVincenzo. I just felt better about his team defense awareness and his shooting off motion. We'll kind of see how that plays out long term, but definitely I get the idea of DiVincenzo on this roster in theory makes a lot of sense. I just have my reservations if he's going to contribute to the kind of winning that Milwaukee's going to strive for.
Where are we at on DJ Wilson?
He's on the fringe list for me.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I mean, I haven't seen a ton of DJ Wilson, but every time I've watched him, he hasn't done anything to really impress me. Like he's, again, seeing this common thread along these guys. I think he's kind of that 4-5 hybrid. He's not really skilled enough to be a 4. Like he does have some skill with the ability to shoot and dribble a little bit. Not a great passer, even though I think he might be. That was probably his most underrated quality last year to me. He made some interesting passes, but overall, not skilled enough to be like an impactful 4. Not switchable enough to be like a 1-4 switch guy, and then he can't play the 5. He's not that physical. So you're putting another guy who's kind of underweight, doesn't have that frame next to Giannis. It's disconcerting because ideally you play him at the 4, but the Bucks, their best player plays the 4.
Yeah, like he can't hold his position because he's not strong enough. He doesn't really I don't like the jump shot. I think that's ultimately what it comes back to for me. It's very flat. He has like a very he shoots out instead of up in many ways. The follow through looks a little bit funky to me too. He has touch, but I just don't know that I buy the jump shot totally translating. And if the jump shot doesn't translate, so much of it falls apart because he's not a great decision maker with the ball. He is in theory switchable and in theory a good weak side rim protector, but he didn't really block shots like all that much from what I know last year in the G League. So like, what does he do? I don't know what he does at the NBA level.
And I'm buying your analysis of the shot too. Kind of that two motion, doesn't have great arc. That's something that even on pick and pops you noticed. And you watch his tape from Michigan, not a lot of like highly deep shots as far as like deep range threes from NBA range. So I wasn't really buying him honestly as a prospect. I didn't have him as a first round guy. So I mean, you just look back at some of these Bucks picks in the first round, man. I just wish they would have done a little bit better for Giannis there. They've hit some home runs in the second round. We'll call them home runs, like solid picks in my opinion.
I mean, but that's where the value is coming from. For the second round, Malcolm Brogdon and Sterling Brown are home run. I think. Like I'm just willing to call that. And you know what? Like I had Dante DiVincenzo at like 25 or so on my board, but I thought that was a good pick. Like for their specific situation, I thought that was a really good pick. But Thon Maker, DJ Wilson didn't really necessarily get those.
Yeah, and definitely point of relativity is important in the second round. I definitely agree. You can make that argument, but if you call Draymond Green a home run in the second round, you kind of have to lower expectations for the rest of everybody else. But I totally agree. I think if they've done better in the first round, I think this would be a different scenario. It's kind of funny. Last year, I liked their draft if you kind of swap the picks with Sterling and DJ Wilson. So I don't know. We'll see long term. But again, I think that Wilson is more of a guy who doesn't really have a clean fit in the modern game, especially if he can't shoot. But even if he does shoot relatively well, I'm still not really sold on his value, especially on the Bucks.
Of all of these teams, who do we think has the best young core in the Central Division? And, you know, we have to throw Giannis in here, I think, for the Bucks, just because, even though we didn't talk about him, but like, I mean, he missed the cutoff by like a month.
Well, I mean, if Giannis is involved, it's Giannis. It's the Bucks, just because they have the best player. Like, he's the potential best player in the league. Like, I'm not sure if he's ever going to get there as far as pull-up jump shooting, but if you survey the rest of the league moving forward, you can make a pretty convincing argument that he is the best prospect overall. I would say if we didn't include Giannis, it would be Chicago for me pretty easily.
If we put in, so like if we like just say like overall young cores and like future value, so like we throw in Oladipo, we throw in Blake Griffin and Andre Drummond, we throw in, okay, we don't throw anyone in with the Cavs, we throw in I mean, Kevin Love's there. We throw in no one else really with Chicago. Like, do we think Indiana second, though? Like, I think it's probably Indiana number 2.
Yeah, I mean, Oladipo ships that calculus. You're always going to take the top-level talent. Well, I kind of want to see it for one more year from him, but overall, you can make a very convincing argument. It's very close between Indiana and Chicago for me in that instance. I'm higher on Wendell than you, so maybe I view Chicago a little higher than Indiana overall, but they're very, very close.
Yeah, I think that's tough. Between those two is tough. I would probably go Chicago 3, I would go Detroit 4, and I would go Cleveland 5.
I agree with that. Cleveland, Detroit's another really close one overall. It kind of just depends on how high you are on Sexton. You could sell me on that. You could sell me on Kennard, even though I'm not really a huge believer in his ceiling. But I think Cleveland and Detroit are clearly the last two on this pecking order of 5.
Yeah. I think that's about all we got for this pod. Anything else you want to talk about?
I think we got through basically everybody.
Yeah, we did well here. Cole, tell the people where they can find your work.
As usual, on thestepin.com, we actually recently created a donation tab. We're going to try to build a new site here, so we are taking donations. So if you're feeling charitable, head over to the Step In. We have a tab there open, so check that out. And as always, continue to listen to this podcast.
Go donate to the Step In. Go subscribe to The Athletic. Keep me employed over there. I really have enjoyed my time over there. I get to write about the NBA now, which is fantastic, and I've hope that you guys have enjoyed reading some of my work on the NBA. We'll be back later, I'd say next week by the time this podcast goes up on Thursday. But until next time, we'll talk soon. Bye.